Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn. I run the services at MedCommsNetworking.com. There are information services, resources, activities for the global MedComms community, by which I mean people who work in and around MedComms, by which I mean medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and beyond. So there's all sorts of stuff going on there. Go and have a look at MedComsNetworking.com. One of the things we're doing at the moment is running these webinars, which is great because we get an international audience. We can get an international group of panelists talking about stuff that's relevant to MedComms. If you miss or would like to look back at previous webinars, we've got nearly 300, more than 300 videos now at NetworkPharma TV. So there's a really good resource building up there. And there's lots more coming. So today I'm absolutely delighted that we have got three panelists, from a couple from the US, one from the UK. So as I say, the international flavour is coming through here. We're going to talk about extending the reach of publications. And what I'm going to try and do today is talk about the practicalities. So we've run various webinars where we talk about what's possible. And there's some nice case history work that we've now talked about. But what actually happens in practice, and I do get a bit sort of frustrated about this topic, you know, extending the reach of publication seems a sort of a blindingly obvious thing to aim at, and I'm not sure we're doing as much as we claim to be doing, and I think sometimes it's ready to be a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, but the practicalities can sometimes just make it difficult to do what we want to do. So the idea today is I've asked Patricia to come along, and she's going to share results of her survey that she's been running for the last few weeks about what's happening out there. And thank you everyone who's joined in with that. And then Kelly and Sarah, I've invited to come along and just as people who work in this field, just talk about the sorts of practical issues that you face, and the opportunities and the challenges and so on. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Patricia to introduce herself and share the results of her survey. Over to you, Patricia.
Peter. Welcome everyone to this MedComms network webinar on digital enhancements, and thank you for taking the time to attend this session today. I would like to thank Peter for this opportunity to share the results from a survey that I developed to gauge interest in and demand for digital features for primary publications in peer-reviewed scientific journals. So as part of my work as a medical writer and as a publication planner, I've noticed increasing interest from authors and sponsors of publications in the development of digital features for their manuscripts, which oftentimes raises many questions about the different types of formats, requirements, compliance, and the optimal use of time and resources. From the perspective of sponsors of medical publications, the perception of the value of digital enhancements is highly dependent on the leading publication manager. But certainly there's a strong interest in digital publications, which has only increased in the past year, with most meetings occurring online, given the pandemic. But does this interest actually is actually happening in the real world outside the context of MedComms? So that was my question. And what were medical writers and other professionals working as freelancers or in different types of institutions doing regarding digital enhancements? And mostly what their perceptions, concerns, and challenges in the development of these features were. So I'll be presenting today selected data from my survey, which started in 2020 and is still ongoing. And thank you again, Peter, for disseminating the survey. So preliminary data from this survey were presented as a poster at 2020 AMWA Medical Writing and Communication Conference in October last year. So this is some demographic data from the survey. As of May 24, there was a total of 113 responses, spanning a spectrum of different professional settings. The majority of the respondents were based in Europe, 58%, and 36% were from North America. The top three roles were medical writers, 67%, publication planners, 31%, and editors and proofreaders, 24%. These medical communication professionals were mostly freelancers or employed by MedComms or contract research organizations, and also by pharmaceutical companies. And a small proportion worked for medical societies, journals, and other research or educational organizations. A digital enhancement in this context of medical publications is defined as a digital feature that is developed to aid in the dissemination of scientific information. In the case of this survey, it referred specifically to primary manuscripts. About half of the respondents developed digital enhancements, and mostly for clients in industry, which included pharmaceutical companies and MedComms. 48% reported receiving more requests for developing these enhancements during the pandemic, which is probably not surprising. The most frequently developed enhancements were infographics or illustrations, followed by audio slides and video abstracts. Animated abstracts and interviews with authors were also frequently reported. Not all journals offer the possibility of hosting digital enhancements, and some may involve payment of a fee, which adds to the cost of development. In our survey, the respondents reported as main barriers in the development of digital enhancements, lack of specific training or experience, 45% of them reporting this, unclear or absent instructions from the journal, 20% of the cases, and lack of time or insufficient pay, about 21%. 62% reported proposing the development of these announcements to clients, and the majority, 78%, suggested these features to industry clients only. The perceived benefit of digital enhancements was improved data visualization and comprehension for about 60% of the medical communication profession, followed by increased interest in primary publications, 21%, and increased access, 30%. Interestingly, for clients, these reasons did not follow exactly the same pattern. For clients, the main reason was to stimulate interest in the primary publication, with 36% of the respondents, increased the data access to a wider audience with 28% of responses, and finally to improve data visualization and comprehension with 22%. The reasons for clients not pursuing the development of digital enhancements were also different, depending if they were in industry or if they were in academia or other societies. Although industry clients mostly rejected proposals to develop these enhancements owing to cost and time, concerns about the perception of the digital enhancements, and also author availability, the non-industry clients mostly reported time constraints and lack of interest or knowledge from the authors. So here you have in this table different reasons for clients not pursuing the development of these enhancements, and they are slightly different. In the numbers are slightly different depending on the context of the setting, the professional setting. So in summary, digital enhancements are currently a complement to traditional publications, but the uptake by sponsors and authors may be hindered by the high costs of production and the time invested in their development. For medical writers, specifically, the development of digital enhancements may require new skills and discussing the benefits and concerns of these features with their clients. So I'll now pass to Peter and to open the discussion.
Excellent, thanks, Patricia. And before we start the discussion, I'd like to ask the other two panelists to introduce themselves. But Patricia, can you just lose the slides, and then we'll start with Sarah. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, what your position is, what you do, and then we'll go to Kelly. Sarah first, yeah.
Great. Hi, everybody. Lovely to be talking to you today. My name's Sarah Feeny. I first started in MedComms in 1995 when I started working for an agency called GCC, still around. And I moved on to a company called CMC, and I'm now freelancing. When I first started, you had to submit your manuscripts hard copy in triplicate via the post. So it gives you an idea of how much things have evolved. But given the time frame and how much technology has evolved, probably the way that we're now using what the tools that we have to talk about publications is still perhaps quite conservative and traditional. So looking forward to the discussion today to see what people's experiences are, talk more about the challenges and see about the value, perceived value, actual value of overcoming these barriers.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. And Kelly, you introduce yourself.
Hi, hi everybody. I'm Kelly Schrank. I'm a medical editor in the US. I have my own business, Bookworm Editing Services. And I think I'm probably here because in the last couple of years, I've been asked to help more with infographics and visually appealing slides. And I did a session at the AMWA conference in the fall where I talked about this, and I'm working on a few other things related to that. So looking forward to talking to everybody about this.
Excellent. Excellent. So thanks. So look, the members of the audience, we've got quite a large group of you online at the moment. So we'd encourage you to text in questions, comments, observations. We'd like to try and get some experience from the audience here. So you've got a couple of buttons at the bottom of your screen. You've got a Q&A button and a chat button, both of which call up text boxes, and you can use those to text us in. And we'll weave those comments and questions into the discussion. As I said at the beginning, well, I'm interested in the practicalities of all this. But let's start with Patricia. I just thought, but maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth. So, just out of interest, was there anything that surprised you from your survey?
Yes. Actually, when medical writers and other professionals said that the main difficulty was lack of specific training to develop these features. And I've been asked before, okay, where do you learn to create these features, and are there any specific courses? But basically, from my experience, it involves a lot of Googling and looking at tutorials and reading. But I've come across some courses online, and so I think there's probably going to be more of an offer in terms of continuing education in the development of these features. And that also depends a lot on the journal. Most frequently, journals accept audio slides or video abstracts and infographics. But I think there will be a little bit more diversification in the future. And I've come across also Twitter abstracts, which it's an interesting concept and involves some knowledge of the technology. Okay. So definitely that was my main surprise. I don't know what the other panelists think about this.
Yeah, no, and I'd like to bring the others in. I mean, perhaps we should always, I guess I always couch this a little bit in sort of, there should be a health warning over this. This is an online survey. You had 100 responses. That's great. Thank you everyone for joining in. But it is just a snapshot, and we have to not be over interpreting some of this stuff. Yeah, but I think some of the points that it brings up is interesting, and hopefully will lead to an interesting discussion. Kelly, can you I'd like to follow that, as Patricia says, by just asking both of you, Kelly first, was there anything that you saw that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was, again, that so many people thought they didn't have the experience needed, but then I was also, maybe I wasn't surprised, but when they said they didn't have enough, when the guidelines weren't clear from the journals, because I've actually experienced that, like when they say, oh yeah, visual abstracts are recommended, and then you say, oh great, so what kind of specs, like how do I put this together? And they're like, wow, we don't really know. And like, right. Oh, like, could you show me one that you've had done in the journal before? And they're like, no, we haven't yet. We haven't had one yet. And so like, so I kind of get that, where it's like, you think, you're like, okay, let's do this new cool thing, but you have nothing to go by.
I mean, again, and I'm going to try not to just sort of dominate this with my own jaundiced views of this sort of thing, but I feel like we spent years talking about some of this stuff, and the sort of point you're touching on is exactly the problem. You know, people will talk about what could or should be done, but then you go, right, okay, I'm going to do this, and they go, oh, well, the journal platform won't accommodate it or something,
or they just don't know yet. They want to put it out there like, yeah, sure, let's do that. And then you say, okay, well, what exactly do you need? How am I going to do that? And they're like, we don't really know yet. Like, okay.
And like you said, you know, show me an example. And they go, oh, well, there isn't actually
one. Had one yet.
And that's not to say there aren't examples out there and there aren't people doing some useful stuff. But I'd like today to get this sense of realism about the whole thing. Sarah, have you got, again, just following the same sort of line of thought for the moment, reacting to the survey, was there anything in there that surprised you?
I agree. There's sort of the idea that, you know, how do we learn, how do we do this? Because I think in MedComms and, you know, medical publishing, we're very good at learning as we go along and that sort of thing. And some of the things I think are actually quite easy to do, and we should be sharing that knowledge between us as well, and we can go on to do that. And I think the thing that I didn't find, the other thing that was nice was that the findings were a lot of my own experiences as well. One of the things that didn't surprise me, and it's something that's come up on the Q&A, is this challenge about things being whether they're considered promotional, and the whole compliance piece that clients have to face. If I'm going to do an extra piece for one primary publication, do I need to be doing it for all of them? There are some clients that have said, I can't choose which articles are going to be open access and I'm going to pay for. I have to do it all or nothing. Yeah. And similar principles, if I'm going to do this type of activity for my really nice, really important, groundbreaking publication, what are the implications for my less important studies, and even more importantly for my studies that don't show what I thought they were going to do. So I think that is something that is key for clients as we try and navigate this area and do new things.
Okay. I feel like sometimes if you make something that's too pretty, they already think it's branded. You know, exactly. Like even if it's just disease state or if it's just something that's very generic. So
and it's difficult because it's a judgment, isn't it? To a degree it's a judgment, and people work in chains of, you know, up and down, management control and so on, and if someone is just a little bit worried about something, it's easier to say no for whatever reason.
It's a very conservative industry. I think very conservative people have already said that.
Yeah.
They're scared. They don't want to be the first one to do whatever's new. They don't mind following, but if you're the first one, you're the one who could get dinged by the FDA or whoever.
Yeah.
You know?
But also just picking up, I think, on what Sarah was saying there and extending it. I was talking to someone recently, and there's like an SOP. We will always have a PLS with a paper, and the situations they were finding themselves in was, well, the journal doesn't have that opportunity to publish a PLS, but that didn't matter because the SOP was there has to be a PLS in every paper. So what they were doing was putting a figure into the paper. So figure X would be PLS, and then it was in the paper, so they tick that box and they publish the paper, but that doesn't achieve anything, especially if the paper's then behind a paywall. And it's that sort of thinking that I find a little bit bizarre. Let's, again, we're starting to get some questions, so we'll pick up some of this question in a minute. But just on the open access question, which Sarah, as you mentioned, are you finding that that people generally are for open access? Our clients, our MedComms agencies, or is everyone pushing for open access? Which is sort of the first point, isn't it? If it's not open access, you're not going to get the wider distribution anyway. But what's your experience? I'm just going to bounce around. Sarah, what's your experience at the moment? Are people going, yes, we should do everything open access, or is it much more conservative than that? I know there's a couple of companies out there who mandate it, but what's your experience at the moment?
Mine is that we're moving more towards that. That is becoming a standard cost that industry clients are expecting to pay for the publications that they're doing. But I think it comes back to taking it back to first principles, Peter, about who is the audience for these activities, and what is the purpose of doing them? Because there's a difference between a peer-to-peer discussion, a video of a researcher talking about the implications of their research, versus an infographic that's meant for a lay audience to communicate. There's a difference between it being on a journal website versus publishers use it to promote, drive awareness of the activity and to their journal. And I think sometimes, you know, we kind of just get caught up in, we have to do a digital, you know, because the pharmaceutical company has a drive towards doing these things, rather than actually taking it back to what do we want to achieve, who is it for, and therefore what are the other considerations that we need to have.
Okay, and I think that's really, really important point. Just Patricia, from your point of view on the open access question, are you seeing that same move, and how far down the line are we? I mean, Sarah, you said we're moving that direction, but that could be we're at the beginning or the end of that process. So, but Patricia, where do you see us on that spectrum?
Well, I definitely see an interest regarding open access, almost in, you know, for all our projects. The question with the digital enhancements sometimes is actually lying with the journal. The hosting is sometimes an issue because it's either a video is incorporated as supplemental data, or in some cases it's prominent together with the abstract. But in very rare cases, there are video abstracts that are hosted in a separate website. So all these issues can be concerns for the sponsors, because it relates to copyright and all these compliance issues that they have internally. I think ultimately, my experience, we had to communicate with the journals directly and ask questions. Where is it going to be hosted? Is it going to be disseminated or not? Is it going to be visible? Are we going to have a separate DOI for these announcements or not? Can they be searched in PubMed? And then also the question of metrics. I haven't really seen metrics specific for digital announcements. They're always related, associated with the primary publication. So we don't really know if having a digital announcement there and people clicking on it, if they actually are going to read the paper afterwards or not, or download it. And also for, even when we have metrics for the digital announcements, we don't really know, usually it's number of clicks, and we don't really know people are watching it till the end, and if they're taking any action. So we don't really know how effective these announcements are in the real world. And I think a lot of journals do not provide sufficient metrics, although in my experience, you can always contact them and ask them, and sometimes they will provide you those data personally, although they're not displayed on their websites.
Yeah. I mean, again, metrics is a whole session in itself, really, and the misuse of metrics and what's a click or what's a hit or whatever, you know, and it's this sort of thing, which is a bit frightening the way some of that's used. So I think there's some very important points you covered in there. Just, I'm going to, there are quite a few questions starting to come in. So let's pick up on a couple of these sorts of things that are coming in. Let's just start at the top. Caitlin came in quite early on, the percentage of audio. So I was surprised. I mean, I was surprised at some of the numbers that you came up with. And as I say, I don't think we should get too hung up on the numbers. But you know, the infographics was very high actually versus everything else. Caitlin's asking about picking up on that point. The percentage of audio slides wasn't higher, as all the congresses we're working on are converting to virtual seem to be asking for that. Again. A view on audio slides, that sort of thing. Would you agree with what Caitlin's saying? Everyone seems to be asking for it now. Maybe the survey is underplaying the number of people that are getting involved in that sort of activity. Sarah, you were nodding furiously there.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that the survey was specifically referring to digital announcements for primary publication. So I didn't look at Congress and conference data.
Okay, so fair point. Okay, so fair point. We should distinguish those out. Okay. Let's come back to the infographic question. Let's bring Kelly in, because I know infographics is a bit of a thing for you, Kelly. And there's comments coming in about complexity or whatever, and some of the survey data. Talk to us a little bit about your view on infographics, what it means, and is it as complicated as people make it out to be?
don't think it has to be. I mean, I know that there's graphic designers out there that will, put these in Illustrator and they'll really take them to another level. But I've found that just in PowerPoint, people can create infographics themselves. You can have a lot of control. I mean, there's a lot of apps out there like Infogram and Canva. They have infographic templates that you can use, but I find that you're kind of stuck with them. You're stuck with using that site or that application, whereas PowerPoint, we've all got PowerPoint. Hopefully most of us know how to use it at least a little bit. For the freelancers, you might want to upgrade to get up to the O365 because there's a lot of new templates in there. There's a lot of icons, there's images, there's a lot more in there than there used to be. So I feel like, a lot of people can take on, infographics and other kinds of illustrations in PowerPoint that maybe they weren't comfortable with a few years ago.
Just out of interest, this is a stupid question, but I'm allowed to ask them because it's my sort of party. How do you define an infographic, Kelly?
For me, it's usually either a page or sometimes they have these things called rolling infographics, which is what you kind of see on a website. And it's blocks of text. It's a lot of color. There's data points that are kind of separated out. Maybe the numbers, it's like your numbers is 69%, blah, 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 smaller, just kind of, breaking things out, chunking data. You're not going to have a lot of sentences. You're not going to have paragraphs. It's going to be more like little data points throughout to kind of, tackle a topic or maybe multiple topics.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to get at, I don't think an infographic is a very clearly defined thing, and people use it for all sorts of things, and it might just be a good figure. I mean, what's wrong with just a good figure there? What's the good figure on PowerPoint? Okay, right. And one of the things I was interested in with the data was the very high number of people that were saying it was, and this is about all digital enhancements, but it's about improving data visualization. And the survey results anyway seem to focus more on that, which just seems like a good thing. Whoever's going to read this thing, you want to have an illustration or figure that is clear,
because we don't have the attention spans we used to have. So we needed to see things quickly.
Okay, but I suppose my point would be that's just good practice, surely. 20 years ago, surely, in principle, if you'd done a figure for an article, you'd have made it look as sensible and clear as possible. But people have focused in on that. It would lead to more access and more understanding and all the rest of it. And your figures, Patricia, seem to be less interested in that. Stimulating interest in primary publication, increasing access to wider publication is much less than improves the data visualization. I just find that an interesting, in my head, that's just an interesting sort of point that I think and it might just be the way people answer the questions, but I think there's an interesting point in there that you should be publishing good looking data in the first place, and then that leads to all this other stuff that's important. Sarah, you look like you want to come in. Sorry, am I just talking
Peter,
rubbish?
I'm going to jump in on that because I think I think it is, you're kind of like, what's wrong with the way you're presenting your data in your primary publication is kind of like the back to that, right? And I think sometimes there are some conventions that are expected within the way that we present data within publications. They have a lot of information. There's and sometimes having these additional supplementary activities allow you to move away from some of those conventions a little bit, simplify things, and in doing so your message becomes clearer. That more is not the important thing. So I think sometimes that's the freedom that you get with these additional things is bringing things a little bit back. The other thing as well is that we do still think about things ending up in black and white print, even though often they are color online. A lot of journals are still black and white print journals or PDFs that people print off at home. And so there's an element there that, that we do consider when we're putting something into a main body of a manuscript. But yeah, I do think it's interesting that we're not thinking about how we can create better visuals to actually go into the main body of the manuscript as well, particularly because we hear and we've heard for a good 5, maybe 10 years about journals wanting to think about advancing what's actually online. So it's not a static little graph within an HTML page.
I like what you're saying about freedom, though, because to me, like the freedom and the fear kind of go together, right? Because it's such a conservative, and you have to have certain things to back up the data. So you can't just make it pretty and just put your points out there. Somewhere you've still got to have the background, that shows that it's real and that you did what you're supposed to do, that kind of stuff. So I feel like that, the freedom is great, but then I think that's where a lot of the fear comes in, that people don't know how to do that.
Yeah, and it's a really good point, actually, Kelly, because I think as well, when you're working with, my experience with working with clients in this field is that they want to put a lot in, because they're feeling like we're in new territory. We don't want to be accused of anything. And actually, if you look at what the New England Journal called their visual abstracts, it's kind of like a baby infographic. And if anybody hasn't gone and had a look at those, I would encourage you to do that, because it's really simple and it's got such a small amount of information in there. And if you think about what they have distilled down, this is done by the journal themselves, what they distill from the publication and take that down, I think that's a really useful tool to be able to share with your clients and say, look, this is considered okay to take things down and really crystallize things into maybe 4 really quite small elements of a really big picture. It's not supposed to be a way of communicating absolutely everything digitally.
And just out of interest, being slightly again stupid about this, but who's responsible for trying to advise that? Are you looking for more from the journal? Are the MedComms agencies, the writers, the people in the middle? Is the client, I don't know, different people at the client? I mean, how's that supposed to work itself out? How responsible are you, say, Sarah, for pushing back on some of that stuff? Or do you want the support from the journal? Are you getting the support from the journal in terms of more guidance and guidelines and so on, which it sounds like maybe there isn't that much practical guidance coming through from the journals by and large?
No, there isn't. And as a writer, you're always supposed to be writing on behalf of the authors that you're working for anyway. So you have to be guided by them. But I think, we would consider ourselves as experts in this field and able to guide authors and clients, industry clients, as to what is appropriate to include. From my perspective, it would be immensely helpful if the items that we develop are peer reviewed. I think on the whole, I don't know what the other panelists, but the items that I've been involved in development have gone under a journal editor review or an editorial review, but that have not gone through the formal peer review process. And that, I think if that was something that happened, it would be something that would make our industry clients more comfortable. But it does then bring up the whole discussion about, when do you start talking about these types of add-ons? Do you do it as you're developing the manuscript? You don't know which journal is going to end up accepting it. So you might take it to a first journal that allows X, Y, and Z, but they might reject it straight out, and then have you gone to the effort of developing something that you can no longer use? Or do you leave it until a much later point, by which point you've kind of missed the peer review and that sort of thing? So I think that's another challenge, is when to have the discussions with your industry clients, with your author group, about whether or not these are going to be some of the options you're going to consider.
I will just pop in quickly, because I can see a couple of publishers online listening to this who I happen to know would be sitting there going, but we have this process and we can explain it, and you have to work with the process, and it's peer reviewed and all the rest of it. So again, some of what we're talking about here is real life. It's there's lots of people out there, lots of situations. So it's interesting to pick up on the ideas, but that's not to say that some people aren't doing the right thing. I suppose that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, lots of variation, and I think that's one of the challenges. Yeah,
definitely. If we could come to some kind of, I mean, with all your journal submissions, it's all different. Like we could have one workflow for everybody. Why can't we have
one workflow?
And really work it out so that you could put all this in there. Where does that fit in? That would help, but that's another discussion altogether.
Correct? Yeah, exactly. I wanted to specifically pick up on things like video abstracts and that sort of thing. I mean, I years ago I was going, why can't someone just pick up an iPhone and video an author, talking about their paper? And wouldn't that be just a nice little feature to add to a journal article? And what's the problem? And I was told, oh, Peter, we don't do things like that. We do it properly, and that would be too expensive and too whatever. But again,
no, I think that would be too cheap.
What's your view on that? Too cheap, exactly. No,
yeah, because there's a whole industry around creating things at a very professional level, right?
Exactly, which is my cynical view of what that argument was about. But again, over the last year, and Patricia, that came out of your survey, there's been a lot more interest in digital enhancements and so on. Lots more people are doing things and playing with things. Again, would you be agreeing that that sort of approach is more is being taken more often now? People are going, yes, I can just do it on the iPhone. We don't need the studio sort of thing. Are you seeing that in real life, or is that still just a little bit in my head sort of thing? Has anyone done any video abstracts, or has nobody? Sarah, I think you might.
So I think so. Yeah, I think that we did used to do, if we were going to do these activities, my experience was we did professional filming, and we did that either at the doctor's clinic, or we did it at a congress when they were going to be at a congress, and it was a big crew, and it was very professionally done. And I think the last sort of 18 months has seen a whole host of Zoom recordings, audio recorded on PowerPoint and overlaid that, in order that virtual congresses can actually happen. And I think there's a real opportunity, as we start to get back to face-to-face meetings, to transfer some of that activity and learning into our publication activities and say, it worked really well there, how about doing it? I think the difference is, for our congress activities, they tend to have a finite lifespan, and often they're behind the congress wall as well. So they have a discrete audience as well, whereas the activities for journals are likely to be out there for a lot longer, seen for a lot longer, and I think that's a difference. But I do see that, if it was good enough for congress activities, then why do we need to have this professional studio set up in order to do that? And there are examples, again, there's a huge amount of variety, because there are a lot of journals that do have mechanisms by which it is very much me and you talking today, and that is absolutely sufficient. I'm just chatting about my research, and being maybe interviewed by the journal editor, and that gets put online. So there are those examples as well.
I mean, I remember very early on, the BMJ, I don't know whether they were the first or not, I wouldn't make that claim, but it was the BMJ, I remember, who started talking about the fact that an author could pick up an iPhone and talk about their paper, and we would publish it. They would publish it alongside. And there were a couple of examples quite early. And I don't know what happened, and I'm not close enough, but I remember being surprised at how many people just didn't join in with that. Authors basically wouldn't join in with it, apart from anything else, because they didn't see the point, or they didn't want to, or they were embarrassed maybe to be on camera and things like that. And I just don't know whether we've come that much further forward from that. And I guess what you're all saying is we can talk about what could be done, but we're still basically saying in practice, we're not taking as much advantage as we could. Are you all just going to nod at me? I mean, maybe we shouldn't, because some of this we could go into in a lot more detail, but that's sort of like, is that just summarizing where we're at? Is that a fair point? I don't know.
I mean, it's been interesting for me that there's a lot of people that, when the option is to put your flat poster up on a congress website, or to do an audio recording and to talk through your poster, there's a number of presenters that have said thanks, but it's only optional, and I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
And you see that. So there are some people that, and perhaps, we're talking about people that English is often not their first language. They may not be that confident, so you have to take that into consideration. But I think it was Kelly that was talking about PowerPoint, and the ability to be able to create GIFs and export as GIFs is such an easy thing. So, rather than having a static graph, it's a graph that builds, and then somebody can put in some text to describe what it's actually showing. That's really easy to do. And I, again, encourage people to just have a play, at doing that, and seeing it is relatively straightforward to do that. And you can get away from some of the barriers of people not wanting to be seen on screen or to have their voice on screen. You can use these text overlays as well. So you can achieve all of these things. You just need to work out what's best for the particular purpose that you want to achieve.
Okay, and I do think the point you were making, Sarah, is very important, because I have a tendency to go, just look, you know, we should make all this much more openly accessible. It should all be much more usable and readable. I want everyone to see it. I then work on an assumption that people who aren't interested don't bother with it, but the people who are interested, and that can be quite a wide audience, will get more out of it, sort of thing. That needs open access, it needs good visuals, it needs video abstracts and all the rest of it. Having said that, we're working in the context of, but actually, Peter, this is for cardiologists and that's what we're interested in. But then the point is to make it as accessible for that particular target audience. So there's some different nuances in there, which is important. I think what I'm going to be honest, we've had quite a few questions coming in. I know we're not specifically answering many of them, but I think we're covering a lot of the ground. And maybe we can pick up on a couple more when we finish recording. But I think for the purposes of today, I don't know, but I could go on for the next couple of hours about this sort of thing. But what I think we've achieved is we've at least raised some real life stuff which people can think about in their own terms. It's interesting that one of the publishers came in to say that they're surprised that their publishers don't all require peer review of the digital, and we all know that's not true, sort of thing. So I'm glad I made the point that I know that it does happen in some cases, but it doesn't happen. And this is the sort of real life sort of stuff that I just wanted people to think about a little bit. We did, and we should be a little bit careful how we answer that. An obvious point though has been asked in terms of the survey, Patricia, that you've presented. We should say that as of today, that's still an ongoing exercise, but you're going to wrap that up and you're publishing it with AMWA in their journal later in the year, okay? And if people want to know more about it, they're very welcome to talk to you directly. And on that note, all of you I know are very happy to hear from people via LinkedIn or whatever. So maybe just for the moment, before I just go on for the next couple of hours talking about this and getting excitable, we should draw a line to what's been quite an interesting discussion, I think. And for the purposes of the recording, a huge thank you to the panelists for coming in and to Patricia for sharing the data. I do think hopefully we've sparked some debate at any rate. I do think there are a number of places we could just go off in a direction and have a whole webinar on its own. And maybe we'll come back and pick up on some of those points. So members of the audience, don't rush away if you don't need to, because we will be here for another 10 minutes. But those of you who are watching this, as I say, and today, but also on the video, please follow up with Patricia, Kelly, and Sarah, and a huge thank you to you three for joining us. So I should just put in a plug. If you're interested in what we're doing at MedComms Networking, then it's medcommsnetworking.com. If you go to NetworkPharma TV, you'll find loads of videos about all sorts of topics relevant to MedComms. And if you're looking at this from the point of view of someone thinking, is this a business I'd like to get involved in, then firstmedcommsjob.com is the place to go. There's lots of information about the MedComms business. So thank you very much. I'm going to ask everyone to give a little bit of wave and take care. Bye-bye. All right, bye-bye.